for the drums.
Hey, Robert.
Hey, Keith.
What have you got today?
Well, I was hoping we could continue our discussion from the last couple of episodes about stuff that we have to decide every day that we're designing a dashboard. And those small decisions that we make that can add up to either a lot of frustration or add up to just simplicity and ease.
Yeah, totally. Like the design of everyday things. And we do a lot of work at Apple, and I just love the way that they put thought into the little things, right? Like you
Yeah.
get home with your new MacBook and you take the saran, the pleasure of taking the saran wrap off of your new MacBook Pro box. Somebody thought through that everyday thing in a way to make it a
Yeah.
magical experience.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of more of those things, some examples for us to talk through. So why don't we get to it?
Okay.
So I love this design principle that we've talked about a lot, which is don't make me think, don't make me work. For me, I like to use the phrase "don't make me click."
Okay.
And now you just mentioned Apple. They came out with their Vision Pro headset, really big eye tracking technology, jam packed in that thing. So now we have to think about the interface of our eyes moving around, not just in VR, but moving around a dashboard. There's been eye tracking studies done in this space about where do our eyes go, trying to understand why our eyes go in certain places and dwell on different sections and all of that sort of stuff. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, it's effort, right? Like it's basically all in the vein of minimizing cognitive effort.
Yeah. So let's take the chart that we've seen a few times already in this series, sales by category. We're looking at this bar chart. I've added a little bit of information on this now because inevitably people don't want to see just a label and a rectangle. They want to know the actual number. And oftentimes that's because, there's still a huge audience that is not familiar with looking at things visually. They're looking at rows and columns in a spreadsheet. They're looking at a header value, some dimensions, some labels, something, a product category in this case. And they're scanning across the row to look for a number to see is that number bigger or smaller. So people still want to know the exact value of that for all kinds of reasons. So in this case, if I wanted to find those numbers and just kind of read through them, my eye would have to jump around a little bit. So I'm going to animate this little line here to show you kind of where your eye would have to go first to find a particular category. Let's say I'm looking for chairs. My eye has to kind of bounce around a little bit. I've got to look at the first letter of each word and sort of figure out the alphabet. I've got to read everything. And so I've got to find where to start reading, which for English speakers, that's going to be on the left. Other languages, it'll be on the right. But my eyes got to sort of go all over the place in order to even just find where to start reading.
Yeah, that's work.
Yeah, it's work. And this is why when you're reading books, the right-hand side of the text might be a little bit jagged, but the left-hand side, everything is always in perfect line. So you know exactly where to start reading. Now, I understand the design decision that Tableau made early on in setting these defaults. They wanted that label to be close to the bar itself. The assumption being that we would look at the bar first and then look at the label.
Which probably is true, right? Right. Like, so first things first, I'm just getting a view of the distribution of the data. So probably first thing I do see is the bar and the distribution. And I see that, okay, whatever are the first two values, they're significantly larger than the rest.
And you know what? Maybe that's true. I think there's a good case to be made that what we're trying to do first is, look at the big rectangle, and then look at what's close to that rectangle. Maybe that's true, but I think that there's still a lot of cases where that's not really how people start in their questioning, start in their reading. Maybe I'm the person in charge of selling chairs for this company.
Mm.
I want to see my data.
Mm-hmm.
And so first I want to find my data and see how it compares to those other categories. So, and in this case too, if I wanted to just look at the numbers, my eyes would have to scan around a little bit. I want to propose how would we go about reading it and looking at it differently if we had different alignment. So this chart on the right, now everything that we want to read for label wise is going to be aligned on the left. And then if we wanted to look at the numerical values, those are all aligned on the right as we typically would with numbers. And I would argue that this type of alignment, this type of arrangement, solves both ways of wanting to look at this data. I can still start by looking at the biggest rectangle.
Mm.
And then I still have a number close to it. I still have a label right in line with it that's easy to find and easy to read. But again, if I'm looking specifically for one category, it's really easy to just scan down the left, read what I want to read. And the numbers, I mean, there's also an aesthetic value here to me as well. It just looks less jagged, in my opinion. So this is a way that I like to label bar charts. What do you think about
I'm with
how
you.
people are going to read that?
This is just way better. It's kind of a both and approach, right? Because there's something in this for everybody. First, from a feng shui perspective, it just feels better, right? Like when I walk into a room, if the energetics of the room are chaotic versus tidy, I feel better in the room that's clean. And so just right off of the bat, before I look at anything, it just feels clean. And that already is off to a good start. But now there's something in it for everybody, because I like what you pointed out earlier is that different people might be arriving to this work for different reasons. And so maybe the what's in it for me is the distribution of the bars and their proportions to each other. Or maybe what's in it for me is chairs, and what I really care about is chairs. Or maybe what's in it for me is the values, and the why am I here is for the raw hard number of 2K, right? And in either case, this is a both and. Whatever I'm here for, having everything just nice and tidy and aligned lets me find what I'm looking for in really short order.
You brought up something that I hadn't really intended to discuss, but I think it's important, is the overall feeling
Yeah.
of order versus chaos. And
Yeah.
and does that do something for people's inherent sense of trust? If it's in order, maybe it feels like somebody put a little more effort into this.
I feel held on the right arrangement. I feel held, and I feel more confident, right? Because somebody has thought about me and my experience, which is perhaps and likely indicative that they've thought about other things too. They've thought about the pipeline that the data went through to get to this position. They thought about, double checking the numbers. If they went to the trouble to have me feel held in the arrangement of the things, in the series that I'm leading on mental models, the introduction to that, I talked with Jonathan about, being in fight or flight mode versus being in a relaxed, open space where I can learn. The jagged thing has my eyes bouncing around, but there's a psychological effect there that has me, say, in fight or flight mode. Because what if I arrived to this dashboard in a hurry and I've got, count them, 90 seconds before I go into the meeting with my boss, and I'm in kind of an anxious state. I'm in that state of anxiety. All of that flittering around of my eyes through chaos is just compounding the sense of anxiety because there's chaos. Whereas this right side arrangement actually just helps put me at ease. And I have the thing that I'm looking for. I feel held. It's all very simple and easy, and there's a nervous system response that's happening there, which is really, if you think about it, what we're doing when we're arranging data on the canvas is to have our audience be able to receive and interpret those things in a way that has them open and receptive, for learning.
I don't know, Keith. Those are some pretty profound thoughts for something that we talk about as being so simple, like a
It's
bar
just a
chart.
bar chart.
I thought bar charts were boring, Keith.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The meat and potatoes of data visualization, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah. Who would have
Um,
thought? Yeah.
right. Let's talk about something else. The last design principle
Okay.
that I wanted to mention, and I don't know if this is really an official term, but this is what I like to call it, which is visual weight.
Okay.
We can talk all day long about pre-attentive attributes and things like this, and dark versus light, big versus small, um, location that we've talked about in a few different places already, affordance, all those things.
Mm,
At the end of the day, though, what is our eye drawn to? It's, I think, the thing that feels heaviest.
mm. Right. Like there's a center of gravity on the page somehow.
Right.
Mm,
Right. So I've put these two charts next to each other because they're both encoding the same things
mm,
in largely the same way, but
mm-hmm.
with some variations to each. And I thought maybe we just have an open discussion about, you know, I don't think that one is better than the other. There's decisions that have to be made, things to think about. So I would just invite you to let's think about it together. Of what are some of the reasons that we might go with the right hand side or the left hand side to choose one versus the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I like the way you're presenting this is you're not being prescriptive in saying that, oh, the one on the right, which has more of a lightness of being, is definitively better than the one on the left that feels heavy. There could be reasons why we want to communicate heaviness or weight, or we don't.
All right, so I'm gonna jump off of your feng shui sort of trail from the
Uh-huh.
last slide. You mentioned lightness of being, and tell me more.
Yeah. I mean, just think about walking down a street, right? And the response that our nervous system is constantly having to every bit of noise, every bit of oncoming traffic, right? Um, there's a lightness of being that is either attainable or not attainable for each human in each moment based on the context and their surroundings. Um, it could be the case, and it's especially the case with our executives, right? Like the executives that we're communicating up to just have an astounding volume of things coming at them from every direction, right? All the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important. This is why so many executives, participate in contemplative practices like, mindfulness, um, practices, meditation practices, emptiness practices, in order to clear out the clutter and to soothe the nervous system so that they can be in this brain state that has them able to execute without feeling as though they're under threat. So that lightness of being sensation that comes from the chart on the right might be the thing that we're going for if if our attempt is to communicate the information um, in a light touch kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've used the metaphor of weight, but I also think your term of turning down the volume
Mm.
works as well. The chart on the right-hand side here, it's by turning down the size of the bars, we've turned down the volume. It's not speaking to us as loudly. Look at me, here I am. I'm
Mm-hmm.
big, I'm colorful. Notice me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Notice me, right? It's loud, right?
Right.
Um, it's loud and colorful. Even when we wear like a really colorful shirt, we call that a loud shirt, don't we?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and our bar charts can be the same way.
Mm.
So do we want it screaming to us or speaking to us?
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that the chart on the left isn't really screaming at us. The colors aren't so bold and wild, but it's larger. It's a little bit louder because of that thickness of the bar. But now there's trade-offs, right? If we go with really thin bars with the left-hand side, because maybe it's important to have that color gradation, not just red and black, but the in-betweens, we want to communicate that somehow.
Mm-hmm.
If those, when we shrink the in-betweens, the lighter grays, the light red, almost pinkish in this one, maybe a little orangish.
Mm-hmm.
When they get smaller, they get almost invisible.
Oh, right, totally. So the
Um,
reason that you can have that continuous color palette on the left with the full spectrum of the gradient in between the two extremes is
yeah,
because each bar has more area to it, and the
yeah,
lighter shades can come through with the presentation of the area. And I hadn't even noticed that in the lightness of being view on the right, you got rid of that gradient altogether because the
that's
short
right.
bars probably just couldn't handle the light shades of pink.
Yeah, yeah, they're there, but there are once you make them so thin, it's just like where's my reading glasses? I don't know.
Mm.
Is there anything even there?
Hmm.
Right. Yeah. So that's the trade-off. Is
Mm.
um, it can we can turn down the volume, turn down the size and the weight of things, but in doing so, we might have to trade off with losing some of that color encoding just to keep things clearly visible.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. One of the other things that's really coming through to me here that is important is the context or the proportion of the viz itself to the enclosure that it's in, right? So in the pre-attentive attributes, there's size, there's position, there's color. Um, Enclosure is one of these really important pre-attentive attributes that I don't really think gets a lot of coverage.
Mm,
And so you're using the pre-attentive attribute of enclosure here because each of your two examples are enclosed in this gray sort of shading, right?
hmm
And so I think the volume of the bar that's coming through or the visual weight is also influenced by the relative proportion of that thing to the enclosure that it's in.
Yeah. Now, so far, we've been talking about the bars themselves.
Okay.
I've learned and found such tremendous value um, in the world of data visualization in thinking not just about those graphical encodings, but also the text,
Mm,
right? We've been talking about the rectangles, and
mm,
what about the labels? What about
mm-hmm,
the fonts,
mm-hmm.
the size and the loudness versus softness of that part, because that is equally significant, but one that I think we should talk a lot more about in discussions like this. So part of my thinking was, do we want the bars to compete for visual gravity against the labels? And it goes back to what's more important. What am I looking for first? Am I looking for the biggest, reddest bar?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I looking for my thing?
Yeah, am I
I'm
looking for
looking for
chairs?
chairs.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
If I'm looking for chairs, I want that to have more prominence, more weight. So that should be around the same size or even just a little bit bigger than the bar next to it,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I want to be drawn toward first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But maybe it isn't, right? It's all going to depend on what are we trying to accomplish here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that thing is Stephen Covey's second habit of highly effective people. Uh, Begin with the end in mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, so know your why. Like, what am I trying to accomplish with this visualization? And then, given that there's so many options of visual weight and what am I calling attention to, um, we can make those design decisions based on that goal. And so having that end in mind is super important when you're weighing the trade-offs
Mm-hmm.
of one design decision versus another.
Yeah. So just to recap, there's so many small decisions that we can make and
Mm.
sit here and in what, 3 episodes now,
Uh-huh.
decent length episodes, talking only about tiny little nuances about how big is the bar, what color is the bar, where
Mm.
is the bar located,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how even just sorting can get a little bit complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Informing people, hey, this bar chart is actually interactive. It's not static like things that you might read on a website or are familiar with inside of Excel and PowerPoint. No, these things are clickable and we can communicate that. All of these little details, all of these everyday tiny little things. There's a lot to talk about, but I've really enjoyed talking about all of those things.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks. So this is a series. We're going to keep going.
We are.
Okay.
And next, we're going to get into something even bigger. We're going to not just talk about generic principles and the meat and potatoes bar chart stuff.
Uh-huh.
We're going to talk about KPIs. Because isn't that something that people deal with day in and day out in so many different ways? I think it's so complicated. I think that there are a lot of ways that we can simplify. We can take that complexity, make it a lot easier to manage and communicate those everyday KPIs
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the data structure, in terms of how we calculate things inside of Tableau, in terms of even just the tiny little visual elements of what do the numbers look like? How are they colored? What do they go next to? So we're going to get into that next.
Got it. I love it. Okay, so the everyday design practices. These first 3 episodes on bars was the meat and potatoes kind of stuff, right? We did affordance, we did proportional density and visual weight. And now, next, we're going to get into KPIs. I really love it. I'm glad you're here, Robert. This is great. You know, as sense makers, this is really our job, right? To think deeply about these things and help others make sense of what they're looking at. So thanks a bunch. I look forward to getting into it with you.
Great. Thanks, Keith.
Okay. See you soon.
Wait for the drums.